My name is Eleanor. I'm 58 years old, and right now I can barely breathe. Just 2 nights ago, my own sister stood over me in the dark, a heavy candlestick raised in her trembling hands, her eyes cold and unrecognizable. The shadows of the room flickered from the hallway light, and in that instant, I realized she had finally chosen her path, one where my life was nothing more than a barrier standing in the way of her freedom. My pulse thundered so loudly, I thought it might betray me before she even struck. The glimmer of the golden locket I wore, the one Mother had pressed into my palm before she died, caught the light and seemed to mock me. That locket, that inheritance, was the reason I was staring death in the face. I could feel the sweat sliding down my back, even though the air was cold. Every muscle in my body wanted to leap up and fight, but fear pinned me like a weight. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and I knew she had been rehearsing this moment for longer than I wanted to believe. My sister, my blood, the same girl who once braided my hair under summer sunlight, was now a stranger holding my fate in her hands. I whispered her name, Clara, but my voice cracked, weak as though the word itself had no power anymore. She froze, her grip tightening, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd remember who I was. Maybe she'd drop the candlestick and collapse in tears, but instead she tilted her head and said quietly, almost gently, "It should have been mine." The world narrowed to the glint of metal above me, and the pounding of my heart. I tried to sit up, but pain exploded in my ribs, where she had already shoved me earlier in the struggle. The taste of blood lingered on my tongue, from when I'd bitten my lip against the floorboards. My hands trembled as I pressed them against the wood, desperate for some leverage, some way out. The air smelled of dust and burnt candle wax, and all I could think was how absurd it was to die in such a simple, ordinary room. The creak of the floorboards under her shifting weight told me the blow was coming. I closed my eyes and waited, every memory of our childhood flashing through my mind like cruel photographs. Clara laughing in the garden, Clara crying when Father left, Clara holding me close during storms. And then silence. I forced myself to open my eyes, and what I saw made my breath hitch. She was still there, looming, her arm quivering in the air, but something in her expression had shifted. Not mercy, not love, something colder. Calculation. She lowered the candlestick just a fraction, her lips parting. "If you scream, Eleanor, I'll finish it. If you stay quiet, maybe you'll see the morning." Her words were like shards of ice cutting into my skin. I nodded quickly, though I didn't trust she meant any of it. She crouched closer, the smell of her perfume, jasmine and something bitter, invading my lungs. She whispered so softly, I almost missed it. "Pretend you never had it. Pretend it never existed." But how could I pretend? The jewelry was real. The will was real. Mother's shaky handwriting, the trembling voice as she'd told me, "This is for you, Ellie. Only you keep it safe." Those words burned inside me. That necklace wasn't just gold and diamonds. It was trust, love, a final gift that carried all of Mother's faith in me. To erase it would be to erase her, and Clara knew it. That's why she wanted it so desperately. My chest heaved, and I tried to speak, but my throat locked. The silence between us stretched until I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Clara straightened and backed toward the door, her eyes never leaving mine. For one foolish moment, I thought maybe she was leaving, that maybe the danger had passed. But just as she reached the doorway, I heard the faintest sound, the creak of her foot pivoting, the whisper of fabric as she turned back. Her silhouette filled the doorway, and I knew she hadn't finished what she came to do. The house was too still. Even the night outside seemed to hold its breath. My body tensed as I listened to her slow, deliberate steps coming closer again. My palms pressed flat against the floor, slick with sweat, ready to push myself away if I had to. My heartbeat was so loud it echoed in my skull, drowning every rational thought. She paused beside me, towering, her shadow swallowing me whole. Then came the chilling scrape of metal, as she set the candlestick down on the table beside the bed. For a heartbeat, relief fluttered in me, until I realized her hands were now free to strangle me. I gasped, my body recoiling as her fingers hovered near my throat. Her eyes burned with something darker than hatred, an emptiness that told me she had already imagined my body lifeless more times than I could count. My voice finally returned in a whisper so faint it felt like a prayer. "Please, Clara, don't do this." My plea seemed to amuse her. A bitter smile curled her lips as she leaned closer. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about you. It never was. It's about me, my freedom, my new life. And you're in the way." I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but fear had nailed me to the floor. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the room spun. I thought of Mother, of the weight of that necklace in my hand, of the promise I'd made silently at her grave to protect it. And now, in the suffocating dark of that room, I wondered if I could keep that promise at all. Clara's hand brushed my neck, her nails grazing my skin, and I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood again. Then, suddenly footsteps sounded from the hallway. Heavy, hurried, unfamiliar. Clara stiffened, her eyes darting to the door. My own heart soared with a hope I barely dared to feel. Was someone here? Was I about to be saved? Or was this a new danger altogether? And just as quickly, Clara pressed a finger to her lips, her gaze locking mine in a warning that chilled me to the bone. She mouthed a single word. Silence. But the footsteps were getting closer, closer. And I knew, with every nerve in my body screaming, that something was about to happen that would decide whether I lived or died. Section 1. 1,000 words complete. Say next when you want me to continue. You said, next. ChatGPT said. Before everything shattered, life had felt so ordinary, so warm, that I never could have imagined it unraveling the way it did. Back then, mornings started with sunlight pouring through the kitchen curtains, the smell of toasted bread, and the soft hum of the old kettle on the stove. I used to stand there barefoot on the cool tiles, my robe tied loosely around my waist, humming to myself as I prepared breakfast. Clara would sometimes wander in still half asleep, her hair a tangle, muttering for coffee before she could form a proper sentence. I would laugh, sliding a mug toward her, and she'd smile at me like nothing in the world could come between us. It was such a simple ritual, but those were the moments that made life feel unshakable, steady as stone. The house we lived in wasn't grand, but it carried the weight of memories. Mother's crocheted blankets draped over the sofa, Father's tools still lined neatly on a pegboard in the shed, though he'd been gone for decades. The air always carried a faint trace of lavender from the garden, especially when the windows were open on spring mornings. Evenings meant the scent of wood smoke curling from the fireplace, the glow of lamps casting soft shadows, while Irene and Clara knitted or scribbled notes in one of her many journals. We were two women bound not just by blood, but by years of shared laughter and pain, by the storms we'd weathered together after our parents passed, or at least, that's what I believed. On Sundays, everything slowed. We would dress in our best clothes, not extravagant but neat, and walk arm in arm to the small church at the edge of town. The bells would chime, echoing through the fields, and I always felt something sacred in those mornings. Clara sang softly beside me, her voice thin but sweet, and afterward we'd linger to chat with neighbors before returning home. There was a rhythm to those days, a comforting repetition that told me life was stable, predictable. The oak table in the dining room, polished so many times its surface gleamed, became the heart of our world. We shared meals there, long conversations, sometimes even arguments that ended in laughter. It was where Clara would lay out her dreams for the future, and I would nod, encouraging her even when her plans seemed far-fetched. Looking back, I see now that those conversations carried undertones I had ignored. Clara would speak of travel, of cities where no one knew her name, of freedom unburdened by family expectations. I thought it was harmless dreaming. After all, don't we all imagine running away sometimes? I'd smile and say, one day maybe. She would look at me with something unreadable in her eyes before dropping her gaze back to her plate. At the time, I told myself it was just wistfulness. I never let myself consider it might be resentment. There was a gentleness to the way life flowed then. Afternoons spent in the garden, hands deep in soil, laughter carrying over the hedges, the dogs chasing each other across the lawn, their barks punctuated by Clara's amused claps. The town itself was small, quiet, safe. We knew our neighbors by name, waved at the mailman, baked pies for the harvest festival every year. If there were cracks forming beneath the surface, I refused to see them. I wanted so badly to believe that our little world was unbreakable. Even the nights carried a kind of peace, the sound of crickets outside, the low croak of frogs near the pond, the distant hum of cars traveling roads we rarely used. Sometimes Clara and I would sit by the fire with tea, recounting old stories of childhood. She'd tease me about the time I tried to cut my own bangs with Mother's sewing scissors, or the summer I fell into the creek and ruined Father's watch. I'd laugh until tears filled my eyes, clutching my stomach, and for a while it felt like nothing could ever threaten that bond. Those memories became the lullaby I sang myself whenever I felt the edges of loneliness. But memory is cruel when you look back through the lens of betrayal, because now when I think of Clara's smile across that oak table, I see shadows behind it. I hear the hesitation in her laughter, the way her fingers drummed nervously against her cup when I spoke of my plans for the future. She had secrets even then, but I mistook them for daydreams. I should have known better. One evening, I remember distinctly, the two of us sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was streaked with oranges and purples, and the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle. Clara turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel trapped, Ellie? Like this place is too small, like it's choking you?" I shook my head, smiling softly. "No, I feel safe here, grounded." She didn't smile back. She just stared at the horizon, her jaw tightening. I thought she was simply restless. I never realized she was already searching for a way out, already imagining a life where I no longer existed as part of her story. The peaceful days lulled me into blindness. I kept busy with small joys, baking bread, tending roses, writing letters to old friends. Clara worked odd jobs here and there, always restless, always with one eye on the horizon. Still, I believed we were united, that the bond forged by blood and loss would hold us together no matter what. It's almost laughable now, the naive way I clung to that illusion. The house creaked and sighed with age, but to me those sounds were comforting. The patter of rain on the roof in spring, the rattle of branches against the window during storms, each sound became part of the lullaby of home. Clara, though, seemed increasingly irritated by them. She would grumble about how old everything was, how suffocating the walls felt. I would hush her, saying, "This house has carried us. It's part of us." She would roll her eyes and retreat into silence. And yet, despite those signs, I never doubted her love. She was my sister, my confidant. The person I had believed would walk beside me until the end. Even when her silences grew longer and her laughter less frequent, I told myself she was just tired, just yearning for more than our little town could offer. I didn't see the danger. I didn't feel the storm creeping in until it was too late. But even then, in those quiet days, there were moments that unsettled me, though I brushed them aside. I caught her staring at me once when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze sharp, calculating. Another time, she asked strange questions about Mother's old jewelry, her tone too casual, her eyes too intent. I laughed it off, thinking she was simply curious. I see now those were the first tremors, the first cracks in the foundation of the life I thought was so solid. And one night, as I tucked the necklace into its little velvet pouch, I felt her eyes on me. She smiled when I turned, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was then, for the first time, that I felt something stir in the pit of my stomach. A warning, a whisper I ignored. Because deep down, though life seemed so peaceful, there was already a shadow in Clara's eyes, a shadow that was only growing darker. Section 2, 1,000 words complete. Say next when you want me to continue. You said, next. ChatGPT said, Clara and I were so different that sometimes I wondered how we had come from the same parents. Where I found comfort in routine, she thrived on disruption. I was content to wake early, sweep the kitchen, sip my tea while reading the newspaper, and tend to my garden. Clara, on the other hand, often stayed up late scribbling in her journals, restless energy spilling out of her in ways I couldn't contain. She had a laugh that could light up a room, but more often than not, her eyes betrayed her. There was a sharpness there, something restless and hungry, as though she was constantly searching for something she could never quite name. People in town adored her. They'd smile and wave when she passed, her charm smoothing over the jagged edges I knew too well. They thought she was vivacious, full of spirit, a dreamer. I saw the truth, the envy simmering just below her skin. Every time someone praised me for my baking, for my devotion to the church, for keeping our home alive after our parents were gone, Clara's jaw tightened. She hid it behind that charming smile, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. I think the real turning point began when the topic of money started creeping into our conversations. At first, it was subtle. She would ask how much I thought the house was worth if we ever sold it. I'd laugh and say, "This house isn't for sale. It's our history." She'd shrug, but her eyes would linger on the walls as if she was already stripping them bare. Another time she asked about the insurance policies Mother had left behind. "Just curious," she'd say, but her tone was too sharp, too practiced. I tried to remind her of the blessings we already had. We were not rich, but we were comfortable. Our bills were paid, our pantry was stocked, and we had each other. But Clara was never satisfied. She wanted more money, more freedom, more life than our quiet town could give her. She would sulk after gatherings where neighbors praised my pies or admired the roses in my garden, as though she thought every compliment to me was a theft from her. One evening, while washing dishes, I caught her staring at me from across the kitchen. "You always get the attention," she said suddenly, her voice flat. I froze, the plate in my hand dripping suds. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. She shrugged but didn't look away. "People notice you. They always have. It's like you're the good daughter, and I'm just the shadow." Her words cut me deeper than I expected. I set the plate down and wiped my hands. "Clara, you're not a shadow, you're my sister, that's what matters." But she only laughed, low and bitter, and walked out of the room. From that night on, the unease grew. I tried to pretend it wasn't there, but it was like a draft seeping through the cracks of an old window. No matter how many blankets you pile on, you can't shake the chill. Her questions about money became sharper. She wanted to know exactly what was written in Mother's will, exactly what possessions had been promised to me. She would couch it in jokes. "What good is a velvet pouch of jewelry if it just sits in a drawer?" But the edge in her voice betrayed her. The most chilling moment came one afternoon when I caught her in my bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, the little velvet pouch in her hands, staring at it as if hypnotized. My stomach dropped. "Clara!" I shouted, snatching it away. Her face flushed red, but she smiled as if to brush it off. "Relax, Ellie. I was just looking. It's beautiful," but her fingers had lingered too long on the clasp, her eyes too hungry. I pressed the pouch against my chest, heart pounding. For the first time, I saw clearly what she wanted. I began noticing her mood swings more. Sometimes she would be affectionate, laughing with me, reminiscing about our childhood, almost like the sister I used to know. Other times she was distant, cold, her eyes calculating as though she were measuring me against something invisible. Those nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly the bond between us had begun to fracture. One night, as we sat by the fire, I tried to bridge the gap. "Clara," I said softly, "are you unhappy here?" She didn't answer right away. She stared into the flames, her face illuminated in flickers of orange and gold. Finally she said, "I feel like I'm suffocating, Ellie. This house, this town, these people, it's like a cage." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I pitied her. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You never will." I wanted to tell her I did understand, that I too had once felt the urge to run, to escape. But unlike her, I had chosen to stay, to build a life rooted in love and memory. To her, my choice looked like weakness. To me it was strength. That difference between us was a canyon, and it was widening every day. The jealousy became impossible to ignore. At church, when neighbors complimented me on my baking, I caught Clara rolling her eyes. At the market, when someone asked how I managed the garden, Clara would mutter under her breath. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Each sarcastic remark, each bitter glance, was another warning that something dangerous was stirring. And still, I clung to hope. I told myself she was just going through a phase, that life's pressures would ease, that we'd find our way back to each other, but the truth gnawed at me in the quiet hours of the night. Because deep inside, beneath the memories of laughter and shared secrets, I could feel it, like the low rumble of thunder on the horizon. A storm was brewing, and it was coming for me. Section 3. 1,000 words complete. Say next when you want me to continue. You said, next, ChatGPT said. The shift from unease to outright dread happened so gradually I almost didn't notice it until it was too late. Clara became bolder, her words sharper, her movements less careful. At first it was little things, her rifling through drawers under the excuse of looking for scissors, her lingering too long over the stack of bills I left on the counter. Then it became more blatant. One afternoon I came home from town and found her at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread before her. My name scrawled across the top of one in bold black ink. Her eyes widened when I entered, but she didn't shove them away fast enough. I saw enough to know she was combing through the household accounts, the insurance statements, even my private notes about expenses. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling more with hurt than anger. She smiled too brightly. "Just making sure everything sits in order. You know, in case something ever happens to you." Her words lodged in me like a splinter. I wanted to believe she was joking, that it was her way of caring. But her tone was too smooth, too rehearsed. I couldn't stop thinking about the way her pen had hovered over the line that read beneficiary. From then on, I began to notice how often she steered conversations toward wills and inheritances. At dinner, she would casually remark, "People really should update their documents, don't you think?" Or she would ask me what Mother had told me in her final days, her gaze fixed and searching, like a miner digging for a vein of gold. When I hesitated, she would smile sweetly and change the subject, but the question always hung in the air between us, unspoken and heavy. One evening, I was reading in the living room when Clara joined me, her face shadowed in the firelight. "Ellie," she said softly, almost tenderly. "Don't you ever get tired of being the responsible one? Don't you want to let go, just a little?" I closed my book and looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" She leaned back, her smile curling at the edges. "I mean, you've always been the one who keeps everything together. But what if you didn't have to? What if someone else took care of it all?" Her words chilled me because they sounded less like an offer and more like a threat. "I don't want anyone else to take care of it," I said firmly. I said fine. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask slipped. I saw something raw and dangerous flicker there before she forced a laugh. "Of course you are. You always are." That night, I lay awake listening to the house creak and settle, my ears straining for the sound of her footsteps. I remembered Mother's voice whispering on her deathbed, the urgency in it as she pressed the necklace into my hand. "This is for you, Ellie. Protect it. Promise me." At the time, I thought she was just sentimental. Now I wondered if she had seen something in Clara that I had refused to acknowledge. As weeks passed, Clara grew more insistent. She began leaving pamphlets about travel on the table, circling ads for apartments in distant cities. She spoke of starting fresh, of how she deserved more than this quiet little life. I would nod politely, but inside my stomach twisted. She wasn't just dreaming anymore. She was planning, and every plan, every scheme, seemed to hinge on one thing: the jewelry I had inherited. One afternoon I overheard her on the phone, her voice hushed but urgent. "Yes, once I have it, everything will change. I'll be free." My heart lurched, and I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. When she hung up and turned, her eyes met mine. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled too wide and said, "Oh, just a friend, nothing important." But I knew exactly what she had been talking about. I confided in no one. Who would believe me if I said my sister was circling me like a wolf around its prey? Outwardly, she was charming, devoted, the perfect sibling. Only I saw the cracks, the moments when the mask slipped. I told myself to stay strong, to stay vigilant, but doubt gnawed at me. Was I imagining it? Was grief making me paranoid? But then I would see the way her eyes lingered on my jewelry box, the way her fingers twitched when I wore Mother's necklace, and I knew I wasn't imagining anything. One evening, as the wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, she approached me with a softness that almost fooled me. "Ellie," she whispered, "do you trust me?" My throat tightened. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe in the sister I had once braided daisies with in the meadow. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Of course, I lied, forcing a smile. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought she might see through me. Then she nodded slowly, her lips curling in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good," she said. "That sip's all I needed to know." That night, I dreamt of Mother's voice again, only this time it was sharper, more urgent. "Be careful, Ellie. She's coming for you." I woke in a cold sweat, my pulse racing, convinced the whisper was more than a dream. The following days brought new signs. Papers shuffled when I wasn't in the room. Keys went missing and then reappeared in odd places. One afternoon I returned from the market to find the lock on my jewelry box scratched, as if someone had tried to force it open. I confronted Clara, my voice shaking, but she only laughed. "You're imagining things, Ellie. Maybe you should rest more." It was gaslighting, plain and simple, but I was too rattled to argue. Still, I began hiding the pouch at night, moving it from one place to another, never trusting the same hiding spot twice. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump. Every shadow seemed to carry her shape. And then one night, as I checked the locks before bed, I found her standing in the hallway, silent, watching me. The lamp's glow caught her eyes, and they gleamed with something unreadable. "You don't trust me anymore," she said quietly. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Of course I do." But my voice was hollow, and we both knew it. That moment, I realized there was no going back. Whatever love had once tied us together had unraveled beyond repair. We were no longer sisters sharing a life. We were adversaries, circling each other, waiting for the final blow. And in my bones I felt it coming. Section 4. 1,000 words complete. Say next, when you want me to continue. "You said, next," ChatGPT said. It was a gray morning when the truth finally cracked open between us, the kind of morning where the clouds pressed low against the earth and everything seemed heavier. Clara had been restless all night, her footsteps echoing down the hall long after I had tried to sleep. I came into the kitchen and found her already sitting at the table, her hair uncombed, her hands clutching a folded piece of paper so tightly the edges had torn. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't place, somewhere between triumph and desperation. "Sit," she said, her voice flat. I hesitated, but the weight of her gaze pinned me in place. I sat across from her, my palms pressed against my knees to hide their trembling. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed unbearably loud. Finally, she pushed the paper toward me. "You should know," she whispered. I unfolded it with shaky fingers. It was an old letter, the ink faded, the paper yellowed at the edges. At first the words blurred, but then they sharpened, and I realized it was in Mother's handwriting. My stomach clenched as I read. It wasn't just a letter, it was a confession. In neat but wavering lines, Mother revealed something she had hidden from us our entire lives. Clara and I were not full sisters. We shared a father but not a mother. Clara had been the product of an affair, brought into our household under a fragile truce that had never truly healed. My mother had raised her as her own, but bitterness lingered in every word of that letter. And the jewelry, the inheritance, those had been meant only for me, a bloodline legacy that Clara was never supposed to touch. I stared at the letter, my mind spinning, my throat dry. Where did you find this?" I asked. Clara Sip's eyes glittered with fury. "In her trunk. The one you said was empty. You lied to me." I shook my head, my chest tight. "Clara, I didn't say no, I swear. I never saw this before." Her laugh was sharp, bitter, echoing off the kitchen walls. "Don't play innocent, Ellie. All these years you had everything. The love, the approval, the inheritance, and I was just the mistake. The secret no one wanted." Tears burned my eyes as I reached across the table, but she pulled her hands back, clutching the letter to her chest. "You don't set understand," I pleaded. "Mother loved you. She raised you. Blood doesn't sit change that." But Clara Sit's face hardened. "It changes everything. It explains everything. Why she looked at you with pride and me with pity. Why she whispered to you on her deathbed and not to me. Why the jewelry went to you." Her voice broke, raw and shaking. I was never enough. I wanted to gather her in my arms, to soothe her the way I had when we were children, and she'd cried over scraped knees or cruel words from schoolmates. But this wound was deeper than any I could heal. It had festered for years, hidden beneath smiles and laughter, and now it had roared to the surface, unstoppable. For days afterward, Clara moved like a ghost through the house. She avoided me, her eyes red and swollen, her shoulders tense as though she carried the weight of the world. I gave her space, hoping time would soften the edges of the revelation, but instead, the distance between us grew. She would disappear for hours without explanation, returning with the scent of smoke and city grit clinging to her clothes. I asked where she'd been, and she snapped, "Out, does it matter?" One evening, she burst into my room without knocking, her face wild, her hands trembling. "Give it to me," she demanded. I sat up in bed, startled. "Give you what?" "The jewelry, the locket, everything. It's not fair that you keep it." Her voice cracked with rage and sorrow. "It should be mine. I need it, Ellie. You don't set understand. I need it." I tried to reason with her, my words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Clara, those are just things. They don't sit define us. They don't sit define you." But she shook her head violently, tears streaking her cheeks. "They sipped are not just things, they sipped are my chance, my way out. Don't sip, do you see? Without them, I sipped nothing. With them I can start over. I can finally be someone." Her desperation broke my heart, but fear coiled in my chest. I realized then that she was no longer asking. She was demanding, and if I refused, she might take what she wanted by force. That night, I hid the jewelry deeper than ever before, my hands trembling as I tucked the pouch into a crevice behind the old fireplace bricks. I prayed she wouldn't find it, prayed she would cool down and return to me. But when I lay in bed, listening to the silence of the house, I knew those prayers were hollow. The following morning, she wouldn't sit meet my eyes. She moved around the kitchen with a brittle energy, slamming cupboard doors and clattering dishes. Finally, she turned to me, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. "You sit regret this, Ellie," she whispered. "I swear you will." Those words haunted me, echoing in my head long after she left the room. I wanted to believe she didn't mean them, that anger had spoken louder than her heart, but deep down I knew something in her had snapped. And just when I thought the tension couldn't grow any sharper, she came to me one evening with a smile that chilled me. Let's go away together," she said sweetly. "Just a little trip, somewhere quiet. We need a break from all this." Her voice was honey, but her eyes were steel, and in that moment I felt the truth settle like ice in my veins. This wasn't a trip, it was a trap. Section 5, 1000 words complete. Say next when you want me to continue. You said, next. ChatGPT said, when Clara suggested the trip, she made it sound so innocent. Just a few days in the countryside, she said, her voice light, her hands fluttering as though to brush away all the heaviness that had hung between us. Fresh air, no worries, no arguments. She even laughed, and for a fleeting second, I almost believed her. Almost. But deep inside, something cold and heavy twisted in my stomach. I could see it in her eyes, the way they glimmered too brightly, the way her smile held just a fraction too long. It wasn't peace she was offering. It was something else. Something final. I tried to protest. Clara, I don't think that's a good idea. I have things to do here. Her smile faltered, and a flicker of impatience crossed her face. Ellie, she said firmly, this is important. For us, we need this. Her voice had an edge now, a command hidden beneath the gentleness. I knew then that refusing outright wasn't an option. So I agreed, though every part of me screamed not to. The morning we left, The sky was a dull gray, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes breathing harder. Clara was unusually cheerful, humming as she packed sandwiches into a basket, tossing a blanket into the car. "It'll be fun," she said, her eyes flicking toward me as if daring me to contradict her. I forced a smile, clutching my coat tighter around me, the locket cold against my skin. The drive stretched long, the road winding through empty fields and shadowed woods. Clara spoke little, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale. I sat in silence, my heart pounding with every mile that took us further from town, further from neighbors, further from anyone who might hear me scream. When we finally stopped, we were deep in the hills, surrounded by jagged rocks and whispering pines. The air was sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. Clara parked the car and turned to me with that too bright smile again. "Perfect, isn't it?" she said. I nodded, though my throat was dry. We set out on the trail, the path narrow and uneven, stones shifting under our boots. The forest closed in around us, the trees tall and silent, their branches knitting together overhead. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig, the hollow echo of our footsteps. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, and I kept glancing at Clara, wondering when it would happen, because I knew it was coming. At one point, she reached back and took my hand, squeezing it. "I'm glad we're doing this," she said softly. Her fingers were warm, but her eyes were empty. We reached a clearing with a view that stretched for miles. The valley below, the ribbon of a river glinting in the distance, the horizon fading into mist. Clara spread the blanket, unpacked the basket, and sat down. "Let's eat," she said. But I couldn't. My stomach was twisted too tightly, my mouth dry. She watched me with a smile, biting into a sandwich, her eyes never leaving mine. "You sit so tense, Ellie. Relax. You sit safe with me." Safe. The word rang hollow. After a while, she stood and wandered toward the edge of the cliff. The drop was steep, jagged rocks waiting far below. She turned back to me, her hair whipping in the wind, her smile wide and wild. "Isn't it beautiful?" she called. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling as I approached her. The wind roared in my ears, the earth solid yet treacherous beneath my boots. She stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm. For a heartbeat, it almost felt like the old days, sisters standing together sharing a view. But then she leaned in, her lips near my ear, and whispered, "This is where it ends, Ellie." My breath caught, my body going rigid. "Clara," I whispered, "please don't set." But before I could finish, she shoved. The world spun. My body pitched forward, the ground vanishing beneath me. For a split second, I felt weightless, the wind tearing the scream from my throat. Then pain exploded as I slammed against a ledge, my ribs cracking, my skin tearing. I clung desperately to a root jutting from the rock face, my fingers slick with blood and sweat. Below me, the valley stretched endlessly, waiting to swallow me whole. Above, Clara Sip's face appeared, peering over the edge. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of triumph and fear. "Let go," she hissed. "Just let go, Ellie. It'd still be easier." Tears blurred my vision, my arms screaming with pain as I clung to life. "Please," I begged, my voice raw. "We set your sisters." Her eyes hardened, not by choice. And then she lifted her boot, pressing it toward my fingers. I gasped, my grip slipping. My mind raced with images of Mother, of the promise I had made, of the jewelry hidden away. I couldn't die here, not like this. As her boot pressed down, I did the only thing I could. I went limp, forcing my body to sag as though I had lost my grip. I let out a strangled cry, my voice fading into silence. For a moment, Clara froze, staring down as though watching me fall. And in that stillness I held my breath, clinging tighter to the root, praying she believed the lie. Because if she thought I was gone, maybe, just maybe, I would live to see another day. Section 6. 1,000 words complete. Say next when you want me to continue. You said, next. ChatGPT said, thought for 1 in 30s. After the stranger found me and the paramedics carried me from that cliff, the next weeks were a blur of small mercies and slow reckonings. The town brought casseroles and whispered prayers. Neighbors offered to tend the garden and patch the roof where rain had begun to leak. It was practical kindness, the sort that steadies a life that has been knocked off its axis. Clara was arrested, and the private truth of our family, Mother's old letter, the secret that had shaped Clara's bitterness, was played out in public. The courtroom felt like a cold theater where every private hurt was translated into legal facts. I testified, the words extracting themselves from me like teeth pulled with careful, necessary force. The man who had found us on the trail testified as well, his simple account a clear thread through the chaos. The evidence collected, scuffs on the candlestick, prints, messages suggesting planning fell into the record, and the law took its time, moving with inevitable gravity. When the verdict came, I felt a complicated relief, not triumph. Justice had been done in the public sense, but the personal damage, trust, tenderness, the small histories we had shared, was not something a judge could repair. Afterward, I kept the locket, heavy and warm at my throat. It became a talisman, and a reminder of Mother's trust. Sometimes I wore it like armor, other days I held it as if testing whether memory could still be soft. People asked if I forgave Clara. I could not answer in a single sentence. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a single act but a series of choices. I forgave certain things. The desire for revenge, the part of me that wanted her to suffer, because revenge would have chained me to the same darkness that had almost killed me. I forgave the hollow longing inside her that had been warped by secrecy and shame, but I could not, and would not, pretend that trust could be rebuilt overnight. Life rebuilt itself in small, stubborn increments. I mended fences, replanted roses, fixed the steps that had groaned. Each repair felt like a quiet insistence that my life would continue. Some neighbors returned, others drifted away, uncomfortable with the way our private rupture had become a public story. I found companionship in unexpected places, an older woman from church who taught me to darn socks, a young baker who delivered a fresh loaf on Tuesdays, the anonymous kindness of the stranger who had saved me, and later wrote a small plain note, saying, "Glad I was there." Those ordinary acts were anchors. I visited Clara once in the place where she was kept. She looked smaller, shrunken by consequence and time. When she spoke, it was without bravado. "I thought I could change my life by taking yours," she said, voice thin. "I see now I only stole my chance to be better." Her apology was raw and human. I listened and said, "I hear you." That was all I had to give then, and perhaps the only honest exchange we could have after what she had done. In the quiet months I learned that survival depends as much on the kindness of strangers as on family. The man who had stopped on the trail never sought recognition. I sent him a letter once, thanking him, and he replied with a short line, "Take care of yourself." The locket remained both burden and blessing. When the sunlight struck it just so, I felt Mother's palm again as she pressed it into my fingers and asked me to keep it safe. Sometimes I held it, and imagined what Clara's life might have been had secrets been fewer and love clearer. Other times I wore it, and felt the steady pulse of what I had vowed to protect. Time eased some edges. I learned to sleep without flinching at every creak, to open the door without panic, to let a friend sit with me on the porch, and share a silence that did not demand explanation. The garden returned to life. The roses rebloomed where thorns had torn the soil. I planted bulbs in autumn and watched green shoots break the frost in spring, small proofs that life can push through where it was once wounded. Forgiveness arrived not as a grand absolution, but as small gestures, setting down the urge to retaliate, choosing kindness over enmity, living without letting the wound narrate every decision. I forgave the younger frightened woman inside Clara, who had tried to buy herself worth with theft and violence. I forgave myself for the times I had been blind to the signs, but reconciliation, reweaving a shared life, remained out of reach. Some breaks cannot be made whole in the same way. When people asked if I was bitter, I would say no. I was cautious, scarred, deliberate. The hardest lesson was this: the faces that comfort us can also hurt us most. Yet those same days taught me something else powerful, that ordinary strangers can be heroes, that small kindnesses can change the arc of a life, that the law can punish, but healing must be chosen day by day. Now I sit on the bench in the garden more often, the locket warm against my chest, the roses leaning toward the sun. When Clara's name crosses my mind, it comes like a shadow passing over glass. I do not pretend the questions are simple. I live with the scar and honor the life that remains. I share this not for pity, but as a warning and a hope. Tend your heart like a garden, pull resentment's weeds with careful hands, plant small seeds of measured trust, let consequence run its course, and choose each day simple kindnesses, tea, mending, answering the porch light, as the quiet work that rebuilds a life after betrayal, that help free you from being defined by your wound and move.